If anyone wasn't convinced that Rob Kardashian is a giant tool, he surely put those doubts to rest on Wednesday morning when he posted on Instagram nude photos of his on-again, off-again, off-again, on-again fiancée, Blac Chyna. Why? Because he was upset that she looked like she'd moved on with another man. The photos, which show uncensored Blac Chyna's... Sorry.
Don't
Blac
leave them
Chyna's,
dangling. What was the man's name, Jason?
His name was Maserati, right?
I believe so. It was some sort of luxury car.
It was
I
Ferrari.
think Ferrari this time.
Some sort of Italian luxury. Alfa Romeo.
Yeah.
The photos would show, they're uncensored. They show Blac Chyna's genitals, her butt, her breasts, were apparently taken by Rob for his private enjoyment and entertainment, as these photos tend to be taken, during the happy times in their relationship, consented to by Blac Chyna at the time, apparently, that they were taken, but kept by him. But seeking revenge now for her audacity of actually being with any other man except for him, he leaked them to the world to see on Wednesday morning. The good news for Blac Chyna and for other victims of this despicable conduct is that many states have passed laws criminalizing the so-called revenge porn. In California, where Rob did his dirty deed on Wednesday morning, is one of them. But just as we were starting to get excited for Rob Kardashian spending some significant time in prison for his revenge porn acts, and you can do significant time, as we'll talk about, Blac Chyna, his victim, may have thrown him a lifeline. I'm Jason Beckerman.
And I'm Derek Kaufman.
And this is Behind the Bar. So, Derek, give us a couple sentences here on what it is these revenge porn laws say.
Yeah, Rob picked the wrong state to do this in. So California has these revenge porn statutes. It used to be the situation where the only recourse you had was invasion of privacy, but that was an awkward fit because things had to be secretly recorded. Revenge porn is for the modern era. So even when what revenge porn laws do in California is that the victim who knowingly consents and knows about recordings, as we have here, Blac Chyna looks to be aware of these. These aren't filmed from a closet or something like that. They're filmed during happier times, as you say. When those images are nonetheless disseminated by the ex, at that point you have...
God,
Jason,
you are so transparent.
Was it that transparent that I used?
Go ahead. You don't have to explain what you did. Everybody understands.
So when these images are blasted out into the world, is that
there
better for
you go.
So when these images are distributed, so he has a very public Instagram page, obviously, and he posted a series of these because he was upset about the Ferrari infidelity. So there's basically several elements that you have to go through. One, that it has to be an image of genitals or sexual body parts. Here we have that. These are butt shots. There's one of her vagina, I believe.
Yeah, and then her breasts.
And her breasts, full areola, everything exposed. So these are clearly past that. You have to intentionally distribute it. We'll talk a little bit about that because maybe Rob might chime in and say he was hacked. But it looks to be that he was intentionally setting these out to the world.
Although that would be a defense that he was hacked if he can prove it. But I think the onus is on him to show that.
Definitely the onus is on him as a defense. There has to be an understanding by you and the person that the images would remain private. I think there might be also some wiggle room there, but we'll talk about that later. And you have to know that the distribution will cause serious emotional distress. And so Blac Chyna actually has to be harmed by this in order to have any criminal offense.
Right. Now I want to really just slow down for a second here and analyze those elements one by one. And this is, by the way, what lawyers do. It's not just sort of throwing things at the wall. You have to, in order for a prosecutor to prove his case, he must show his or her case. He must prove each element of the defense beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not just the overarching crime. You have to show each element of the defense. And so I jokingly said that his intentional distribution would be something that he'd have to put up evidence for. It's actually not true. Right? The prosecution would actually have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he wasn't hacked, that he did it intentionally. But I don't think that's very hard to do, right? You can forensically examine someone's computer pretty easily, and as we all know, it's impossible to erase things fully. So if he did it, it's going to be found out.
That's right. And you were correct to say that if he were to raise the defense of hacking, that would be his burden to establish. Yep. Now, the prosecutor's burden is to establish that he did it intentionally, but if you were to raise a defense, you have to prove that defense, and that burden lies with Rob.
And one of the issues here is the photos were initially posted on Instagram. Instagram, because it violated their terms of use because it showed naked body parts, which you can't do on Instagram, which I think, frankly, is a huge problem with Instagram. And it's why that company itself is not making it.
It's a gigantic hole, yes. that company will never make it.
I wasn't thinking. Where were we? Instagram. Oh, I posted. Instagram took them down. A few minutes later, the photos pop back up again. So he's got to claim that not only was he initially hacked, but that hack was maintained. And the news stories started coming out fast and furious. He was certainly alerted to the fact these photos were up, but nevertheless doesn't do anything to alleviate the hack. it begins to seem less and less likely. But in fairness, I mean, just so we don't get too far afield, I haven't heard him say that he was hacked.
And typically when this stuff comes out, the hacking defense is right at the ready. You can think of J.R. Smith had a few people that would tweet things from his account on the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'm leaving, I'm joining a trade, immediately would say I got hacked. So it's usually right as it happens because the awareness is so immediate.
Although those are more social guffaws than they are, or not guffaws, right? You're not laughing. Yeah, social blips, not crimes, right? Crimes, it's hard to, you can deny them all you want, but again, if the FBI goes in or the LAPD goes in and begins investigating whether or not he committed this crime, it shouldn't be too hard to figure out exactly who pressed the button.
That's right. If his account was compromised, there's going to be a digital fingerprint of that.
That's right. That's right. The second element that I think is really relevant here, of course, is the last one that you mentioned, and whether or not Blac Chyna, well, first of all, did Rob Kardashian do it with the intent to cause her emotional distress? And secondly, did emotional distress actually occur? Did she actually feel emotional distress? Let's start with the first one.
Yep.
Did he intend to cause emotional distress? It seems like he did, right? Assuming the facts are that he posted these. We're going to assume that little hiccup away that somebody might have hacked into his account.
Right.
Does it seem likely that he did it in order to cause her embarrassment, emotional distress?
I think he intended to hurt her.
It's also important to understand the backdrop of this, right? Just in the last few days, he went on a rant, Rob did, where he alleged that Blac Chyna had cheated, used drugs, and more. She came back and posted, in her own right, she posted, quote, "Rob, you did all this, but you beat me up and try to act like it never happened." Chyna wrote on Snapchat, "You put hands on me, I swear to God, on my kids, but I'm supposed to be quiet because you're a Kardashian." So we obviously have no knowledge whatsoever about the veracity of these statements in either direction, but nevertheless, she makes these allegations over the weekend that he has physically assaulted both her and her children, which is an incredible comment. And then this happens this morning. It's really ugly.
It's ugly. And as we sit here today recording this, he has not come out and strongly denied these allegations.
Bizarrely.
Instead, yes, it's bizarre. And now it doesn't tell you one way or another whether there's any truth to it, but instead of doing so, he went out and posted all of these images. And that's an odd response to those kind of allegations.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a little far afield about the illegality of posting the images itself, but just to understand the backdrop of this thing, it is really nasty, but it goes to the fact that he clearly was putting these images up with the intent of emotionally damaging her. They're going back and forth trying to embarrass and cause emotional shame in both directions here, but he's taken a step that is directly prohibited by the law.
Right.
So then we get to the last element, which is, did she in fact suffer emotional harm? And she did something this morning that really undermines any claim that he did.
Yeah, so while he was posting all of these on Instagram, she double-tapped, liking these photos. So as he was posting naked images of her breasts, her vagina, and so forth, she was clicking like to all of those images. And you think that really undermines her case that she was negatively impacted by them in an emotional way, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to rule out for a moment that it's possible that Blac Chyna is just being sort of exhibiting the classic telltale signs of a victim, right? Victims are often abused but don't want to come out against their abuser publicly, and that happens. That may in fact be what's happening here, but that doesn't mean it doesn't make that much harder for a prosecutor to prove the claim that she's clicking like she thinks it's a joke or she doesn't mind, and it will also be used against her that she has been open about flaunting her body for various, as in good on her for being proud of who she is and her body, but it's hard for her to say that she's terribly embarrassed or emotionally troubled by flaunting her body by him flaunting her body when she's been doing it. Now, her response to that would be, I do it at my direction, at my selection, and this man, does not have any right to do it unless I give him direct permission for it.
That's right. And I think if she has an able lawyer, you can deal with messy facts like this. I think it does make her case a little bit more difficult, or makes the prosecutor's case more difficult, but they can turn this around. I mean, Instagram is a pretty crude device. There's only one way to respond to a picture, and that's by clicking like. People click like to all sorts of pictures that they're shocked by, videos that are alarming to them. You click like to sort of indicate that you're aware of it. Another reason she could do it is to show sort of a tough gal persona. Like you can throw these at me, but you're not hurting me in public. But maybe that's actually belying the fact that she was really injured by this.
Yeah, and you do have to, but there is one counterpoint to that. As soon as she clicks like on these Instagram photos, they are now broadcast to her 13 million Instagram followers. So to the extent she wanted for fewer people to see this, that she clearly exacerbated the issue. But that said, I can see her coming back and saying, what do you mean? The whole internet didn't just go to Rob's 10 million Instagram followers. The moment that happened, it was picked up by the entire internet world. So hundreds of millions of people have access to that. My 13 million followers, who are largely redundant of Rob's anyways, right? It makes no difference. The way I deal with people who abuse me, the people that do bad things to me, is I own it, and good on her. And she is a really strong person, and I give her a lot of credit for that. So I can really see this cutting in both directions. But nevertheless, his lawyers, if he is charged with this, will come back and say, you know what? Look, she was not emotionally distressed by this because, and the fact that she liked it is proof of that.
And it does. It shifts the onus on her to explain that fact away. Her lawyer's got to be slapping his head at this. This is not a good fact for him to deal with. I do think it's something they could wrestle with and maybe persuade a jury that it doesn't mean everything you think it means. Yeah. But it's troubling.
Well, what about this idea, though? We see it all the time where women, typically women, who are physically abused and refuse to come forward to testify, the prosecutors will nevertheless prosecute the charges because they say, look, we understand that women sometimes, especially women, often men as well, are reluctant to testify against their significant other despite the abuse because they don't want to suffer the ramifications of that testimony. They don't want that person to go to jail. So the prosecution will step up and say, you know what, we're going to go ahead without the victim testifying. Could that happen here as well?
I think it absolutely could happen. You have here a very high-profile individual. A prosecutor is licking his chops maybe in an election year, maybe if he's looking to make a statement about the Kardashians not being above the law, could say, look, I don't need a cooperative witness. I don't need you. I've got enough here on the facts, and the circumstances are readily apparent to me that I'm going to try this case even without Blac Chyna's cooperation. It's very, very complicated, as you know, to not have the victim be a willing participant in the prosecution of the case, but it does happen from time to time.
It does happen, but for every time it happens, there are probably 100 examples where it doesn't happen. I mean, the most famous example, I think, is Kobe Bryant, right? Kobe Bryant famously settled with the woman who accused him of raping her in Eagle, Colorado. And once that settlement happened, and therefore she refused to cooperate with the authorities, the prosecution was immediately dropped. And that sort of thing happens all the time when there's a non-cooperative witness. Often it's the lack of cooperation comes in this situation we're talking about, which is the victim just doesn't want to testify against her abuser in the Kobe Bryant case because she was bought off via the settlement.
And you can imagine the awkwardness here, where part of the prosecutor's sort of obligation is to prove emotional distress, and you have someone on the sideline saying, I'm not emotionally distressed, I'm moving on with my life. It would undermine the case as it's going on. That could be a very awkward position for the prosecutor.
And not to put too fine of a point on it, but it's not even necessary that she initially file a police report talking about the incident. It's now public. They can go, the police can, on their own initiative, and the prosecutor on their own initiative, can go and begin investigating the case without any sort of police report or cooperation by her in any way. She doesn't even have to talk to the authorities in order for there to be a prosecution brought. But nevertheless, given what he did this morning, which I think is just an irredeemable act that he committed this morning, I think it's, part of me really hopes the prosecutors are willing to go forward, to forge on without her cooperation.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we've talked about it, but it's a pretty serious offense. It is a misdemeanor, but you can do jail time. You can do 6 months in jail for your first offense, and he posted several of these images. There's a chance that the judge could really want to throw his book at him on the first-time offender.
But it's interesting. Derek and I were talking about it earlier. It clearly classifies as a single offense, although there were multiple pictures. But it was taken down off of Instagram. He reposted them again. I wonder at some point if you get into a second offense, can be prosecuted, because once you get into a multiple-time offender, you're going to get into years in prison at some point, and that becomes a really significant deal because, as we know, in California, from Paris Hilton and other famous people who have been sent away for misdemeanor offenses for 6 months, they're out in a few hours.
Right.
But once you get sent to jail for a year or longer, you're going to do a significant portion of that time. You're going to do months instead of hours in prison, and that's a big deal.
What's that sound, Jason?
Sounds like mail time. Parker, what you got?
All right, mail time. Remember to write in your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com. The first one up is from Brett. In a recent episode, there was mention that driving is a privilege and not a right. There are videos posted on YouTube of drivers interacting with police where the driver does not have a current registration or driver's license and actively challenges the police of their right to travel without a license or registrations. The driver claims that the Constitution provides a right to freely, quote-unquote, travel on the highways without a license and registration. Is this accurate or true, and is there a legal precedent for this quote-unquote right?
What you got for me, Derek?
I cheated a little bit, Jason.
I want to dive my teeth into this one.
So Jason did quote, and it's in common parlance. We say driving's a privilege and not a right, and we say that for a reason because you have to be licensed to do so. But there is a Supreme Court precedent. Our intrepid listener found this or was alluding to it. There's a case called Thompson v. Smith, and it's from 1930, and the quotes in it that are often taken out of context are as follows. It says, "The right of a citizen to travel upon the public highways and to transport his property thereon in the ordinary course of life and business is a common right, which he has the right to enjoy as similar as life and liberty, to acquire and possess property and to pursue happiness and safety. The operation of an automobile is included, and the court says this: it's not a mere privilege, like the privilege of moving a house in the street, operating a business stand in the street, or transporting persons or property for hire along the street, which a city may permit or prohibit at will." So people have grabbed onto this quote from the case to say, look, you are not allowed to license drivers. You're just allowed to own an automobile and travel freely between the states. Unfortunately, they ignored the next part of the opinion, which says very clearly, the exercise of such a common right the city may, in the exercise of such a common right, the city may, under its police power, regulate in the interests of public safety and welfare. And this is exactly what cities do and states do.
Right,
they
of course.
have licensure so that you're not allowed to just go out on the city streets willy-nilly because there's a public safety.
Look, there are people throughout this great country, typically you hear about them in Texas, who say, I have no obligation to pay taxes because I don't see anything in the Constitution which specifically requires me to pay taxes. Now, that A is wrong. There's something in the Constitution that requires that.
One of those amendments.
It's just not in the first 10. For some reason, they ignore the rest of the Constitution would say that Congress can amend the Constitution from time to time.
That's right.
So they ignore those amendments. And there is something, the idea that that the state has to let you drive without a license, without showing any ability to conduct to drive a motor vehicle is just silly, and it's taking these things out of context and throwing them up and saying, look, I have an absolute right to do it. It says based on this one sentence in a Supreme Court precedent without reading the rest of the case law is just silly.
It is silly, but people on YouTube do this from time to time. They're able to convince some police officers to just let them go.
Wait, have they actually gotten this done?
There's a series of YouTube videos where you announce this Supreme Court precedent to the officer, and the officers sort of stammer and say, all right, be on your way.
Yeah, you know what the officer's thinking? Oh, I don't want to deal with this or write it up.
I think we got to write this little portion up with their little Miranda card so they have this as a retort.
Or just say
the exercise of that right.
If somebody just goes into this, just say no and cuff them and throw them in prison, please.
That's the other option.
All right, the next one up is from Blaze. As an American and a Canadian who lives in Canada, I am wondering what your opinion would be if the First Amendment, or in my case, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, did not exist within our countries.
I'm pretty sure it's Charter, Parker. I'm going to go with Charter.
It is correct, but he wrote Carter.
No, you're not correcting?
What a jerk. You're off mail time.
I don't edit our listeners.
These are loyal listeners. You are not to make fun of them.
I do not edit them. You gotta write what you gotta write, and I'll read it.
Wow, the Carter. It sounded like a Lil Wayne album. The Carter 5.
The Canadian Carter.
I missed vacation.
All right, I missed the question. But what was the question?
The question is, what do you guys think life would be like without the First Amendment, basically?
It'd be a lot like Britain in 1775, right? Where there are plenty of countries today. As a matter of fact, the United States and Canada are in the minority, I think, of countries where you have an absolute right. At least we do for the time being. It's things are being chipped away, but
feel a lot like China.
Absolute right. We have an absolute right to speak. I don't think anywhere in Asia, with the possible exception of Japan, not possible exception, you have an absolute unfettered right to say whatever you want, and it's not just in Asia, obviously. Russia, much of Africa, some parts of South America. You do not have Turkey. We're seeing it more and more in Turkey, right? That the media can be shut down and individuals can be incarcerated for saying things against the United States. And of course, Derek can tell you all about John Adams and the Alien
How did you know I was going to it the Alien Sedition Act? Did you see me?
I see
honestly,
that
we didn't talk
hamster
about
wheel
this
turning.
before.
I see that hamster wheel turning, and that's just where you want to go. Did you know, Jason?
It makes me very uncomfortable, but I was actually thinking of that. It's one of those rights that's very fragile, and human nature conflicts with freedom of speech because you have people who become empowered and they don't want bad things said about them. I can think of our current president not particularly liking the media's treatment of him, but it goes back to the Alien and Sedition Acts as well.
Just to nerd out for a second, John Adams, our second president. Otherwise, I think history is looking fondly on him these days. But
I think Paul Giamatti helped him out.
Yeah, that's right. But John Adams, with a willing Congress, passed the Alien and Sedition laws, which, among other things, made it unlawful for people to speak out negatively against the president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, just raw censorship.
Was anybody
right
ever
here in the
prosecuted?
founding of
Mr.
America.
Trivia guy, was anybody ever prosecuted under the alien sedition laws? I bet you they were.
I believe they were. I believe they were. I don't know the name of the case offhand, but they were definitely prosecuted.
Parker, can you look that up for next time?
Yeah, sure. I will
How
check
did you
that out.
know I was going to bring that up?
I knew it. I knew it.
All right, and that is it for Mail Time.
Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. We look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again. We don't really see anybody, do we?
No, we'll just hear from
Or we don't hear from them either. Well, send in your comments, and we'd love to hear from you, and you'll hear from us next week. Thanks. Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episodes over here.